What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where we're going to dive into the land of supervision. I don't know how I managed to not do this episode yet, but it's time, because I don't know about you, but anecdotally, I just always hear so many stories about awful supervision experiences. Unfortunately, we're going to pull information from all corners. We're going to look at actual legit research about what good, effective supervision entails. We're also going to hear some stories from you all. Some of the stories are from Reddit and some are from Instagram. And in the extended cut version of this episode, I will also share some of my own experiences as well. So we're going to get into it today. If you're wondering what happened to last week's episode, it never happened. It was the first time in over 7 years of posting weekly episodes that I skipped, except for a 1-month maternity leave for one of my babies. So, someday maybe I'll share more about what actually happened, but I was learning some upsetting news right when I was getting ready to record my episode last week, and I just decided to ditch filming and go to the beach instead, and that was the correct decision. But I am back now, and like I said, maybe someday I'll share more about what actually happened, but it's unfolding right now. A lot of things are unfolding related to it, so we'll just leave it. We'll just leave the cliffhanger. I'm sorry. I hate cliffhangers, but it's not the right time for me to share about that. But I'm okay. I am gratefully really, really more than okay. But yeah, that was just some really upsetting news in my system. Needed a minute to process it, but it is wonderful to be back. I feel more than ready to record today. Thank you to all of you who sent really supportive messages. I just sent an email out last Friday to anyone who subscribed to my email newsletter that I was skipping for the week and taking care of myself. And I got so many kind, supportive messages in response that there's no way I can even respond to all of them, which is just, it's wild. When I think about this platform and the parasocial relationship that we share, like it is genuinely like surprising and so meaningful to me to realize that, like, when you hear that I'm going through something that's hard, that so many of you are having like genuine emotional responses, enough so that then you want to reach out and support. I mean, it means a lot. So thank you for that. And we're here today. We're going to talk about supervision today. I don't know about you, but I really, there are a lot of bad supervision stories out there. And it's one of those things where, like, I think pretty clear on why supervision is such a valuable provision to have, especially as trainees, but at any point in our career, to have like a mentor type figure help us out and walk alongside us, help us move through not only clinical snags or learn new clinical skills, but also to navigate the emotions of this work, make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, helping us figure out where to set appropriate boundaries with our clients. Like, the list goes on and on and on. So I'm super grateful that we are required to have supervision in our trainee phases of our life, especially. And of course, there's so many contexts where we can have continued supervision even beyond that. So why is so much of it seemingly so awful? I can't answer the why in this episode, but I do want to shed light just more on some of the dynamics that are at play here, and also talk a little bit about what good supervision looks like. So let's start on that note. Like, what does good supervision look like? I did find this very helpful systematic review of some of the research that's available on supervision, titled Clinical Supervision of Mental Health Services, a systematic review of supervision characteristics and practices associated with formative and restorative outcomes. That's a mouthful. And this was published in 2021 in a journal called The Clinical Supervisor. I've linked to this article below if you'd like to check it out more in depth, but I wanted to share this quote that highlights some of the key takeaways that they found. Quote, "There appear to be 3 supervision characteristics with emerging support for their associations with formative outcomes. First, supervisor expertise and knowledge of evidence-based practices appear to be important for promoting provider adherence and quality service delivery. Imagine that. Continuing with the quote, supervisor expertise and knowledge are necessary for providing intervention-specific consultation to providers, identifying potential implementation pitfalls, and effectively teaching providers new skills. Second, an effective and collegial supervisor-provider relationship appears to be important for addressing tasks within the formative domain. And third, supervision that is structured with clearly defined goals, format and content, session frequency and duration, and roles and responsibilities may aid in supervision being more efficient and effective in addressing providers' formative needs. This is talking specifically about formative outcomes, meaning like developing therapists' clinical skills overall. And there's also restorative outcomes, which is more about like preventing therapist burnout and other ways of caring for the clinician. So just looking at our like clinical effectiveness, the things that you need to look for are supervisor expertise in whatever clinical tools they're teaching on. Makes sense. Also, that there is a collegial supervisor-provider relationship, which to me feels almost like an exact parallel of the research we have on how important having a trusting therapeutic relationship with our client is in order to offer effective therapy. Sounds like it's the same in supervision. And the third variable is that there needs to be clear goals and an agenda, some kind of structure or format to how supervision is approached, which definitely makes sense to me. And I could see it being quite problematic if every week in supervision it was just like, so what do you want to talk about? Or it could be really easy to veer off task and just end up chit-chatting, which, you know, there's a little bit of space for that, but if that's all you're doing, then it's probably not supervision anymore. This article goes on to explain, I think, a lot of really useful tools about effective supervision. So if you're a supervisor, I think this is worth a read, or if you are a supervisee and you're kind of wanting to check in, like, is my supervision legit? Is it on track? Definitely check out this article. We're not going to break down all of these details today because that could be its own episode, but we're going to carry on and hear a little bit more anecdotally about what good supervision looks like. And what better place to learn about something anecdotally than to check out what Reddit has to say. Of course, we're back on the Our Therapist subreddit, and here is a post called "What Should Good Supervision Look Like?" from 3 years ago. The most upvoted response kind of lays out bullet point formats of good and bad supervision. So it starts with bad. Did you fill out the forms? Is your billing in order? Look at this funny picture of my dog. You should hospitalize that client. Oh no. And the bullet points they give for good supervision include, please tell me of one client who you feel you are doing well and one that you feel have difficulties. I've noticed you often booked 4 to 6 clients in a row with no break. How are you feeling this week? Look at this funny picture of my dog. So they said that one on both the good and the bad, which I appreciate. And their last bullet for good supervision. Sometimes we encounter a client who are beyond our current ability or even the format of this style of treatment. Based on what you've told me, this person may benefit from a hospitalization or referral. How do you feel about that? So the theme that I'm kind of seeing pop up overall is bad supervision is like, did you accomplish these tasks? Which I've definitely seen in more like agency contexts where your supervisor is also more like your boss and making sure you're following protocol for, you know, the entire employer system. And on the good side, it's more about the process. Like, tell me about what's going on. How are you doing? Checking in on the therapist's well-being and making it more of an invitation to have a collaborative conversation, which I definitely really value in supervision as well. Yeah, one of the top comments also says, it's similar to good therapy in a lot of ways. Supportive, non-judgmental, making sure you're seeing the good in yourself as a clinician, fostering your own clinical voice and style, but also calling you on your BS when it isn't helpful for the client or yourself. Of course, I'll link to this below as well if you want to check out what other folks say. But yeah, there's this sense that like good supervision should feel at least a little bit like good therapy. Even though supervision isn't therapy, there are therapeutic elements to good supervision. To me, it feels very similar to consultation as well. There should be an underlying like therapeutic regard, therapeutic environment. There's a phrase I'm looking for. If you know it, feel free to chime in the comments. It should feel still like a very safe, healing environment, with the end goal being, you know, how do you become the best therapist that you can be in the context that you're currently working and learning in? while making sure you're taking care of yourself, rather than it just being about your entire mental health and well-being, but it's included in this context. So to enhance our conversation, I thought it would be interesting to see what you all had to say about your supervision experiences. So I put a poll on Instagram and I asked, overall, how would you rate your supervision experiences? And the options that I gave folks included great overall, I love my supervisors, or mixed, some great and some bad supervisors, or meh, supervision was just okay, I guess, or awful, my supervision was mostly bad. Okay, and it looks like we got somewhere between 150 and 200 replies in total, but the way it broke down was 23% of people who responded said, great overall, I love my supervisors. So that's about 1 in 4 therapists who replied saying that overall their supervision experience has been really great. So that's good, 1 in 4, okay. But it's downhill from there because 54% of people responded mixed, some great and some bad supervisors. And then 19% who responded meh, supervision was just okay, I guess. And 4%, which was 7 people who responded to this poll, said awful, my supervision was mostly bad. Woo! I mean, I'm glad it's only 4%. But that should just, that's awful. I'm so sorry. And then to see that people who were in this middle of the road category between the mixed, like some good, some bad supervisors and the meh, like supervision was just okay, like that's almost 3/4 of the people who responded. So that's a lot of like really mediocre or just like unreliable mixed bag supervision. So this feels really important to dig into because that also aligns with my personal experience with supervision as well. I was reflecting back because I thought like, oh yeah, I've had a fair amount of supervisors in my trainee years. And I was thinking like, how many did I actually have? And I wrote everything down and I did have 11 different supervisors between all my trainee years, which is a lot, it seems. And I very much had a mixed bag experience as well. So I went through and recalled as best as I could each of these supervisors from my trainee years and gave them a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And the amount of supervisors who received a rating of 3 or less was 5 of my 11 supervisors. And the amount of supervisors who received a rating of 8 or higher was 4 of my supervisors, and there were 2 supervisors who got 7 out of 10. So really like 50-50 toss up here of like some really awful supervision experiences and some really amazing supervision experiences with just a couple that were like, okay, that was good enough. Yeah. So I'm curious about you, like if you reflect back on your supervision experiences, like maybe it's worth kind of thinking like what was the breakdown? And for the ones that were more awful, what made them so awful? And for the ones that were great, what made them so great? Now, I'm not going to be able to break down each of these different supervisors in this episode and what was so great and so awful about each of them. I've shared little bits and pieces here and there where I can. But I think like the ones that I gave a 10 or a 9 out of 10, looking back, the strongest response I can give is that like I just felt so safe. I felt like whatever it was that I was coming in with, if I feel like I did a big mess up, if I was feeling so awful, I felt like I couldn't focus on my clients today or whatever, like whatever I might be coming in with, my supervisor was going to have a safe response. And that combination with like, this person is really invested in helping me become the best therapist I can be. And that's like the guidepost, that's the goal that we're working towards. And that includes making sure that I feel taken care of as a person as well. And for the awful supervisors, the ones who got 2 or 3, and yes, one of them got a 1 out of 10, they were not safe to talk to emotionally, but also there were legitimate professional concerns. The one who got a 1 out of 10 was one of my postdoc supervisors. I had 2 postdoc supervisors and I gave one of them a 1 out of 10 and the other one a 10 out of 10. So I have this like at the same time, I was working part-time in these 2 different practices, and I just had these stark supervision experiences at polar ends. And the one that I gave a 1 out of 10, you know, because I was doing my postdoc as in private practice, the one that I gave the 1 out of 10 was my employer directly. He was the one booking my clients on my schedule. Like, he was in charge of every aspect of that particular role. And he made so many mistakes. He double booked my clients. Like, he would just do ridiculous things. Like, maybe on a given day, like, I was available as early as 8 a.m. to see clients, but by the time I went to bed the night before, you know, my 8 o'clock slot was still open and I had a client at 9, let's say. But then I'd wake up at like 6:30 and check my email and realize that, like, super last minute, my supervisor booked a client at 8 a.m. and now I have to scramble and get to my job on really short notice. Like, it's just so inappropriate. So that supervisor, and we did not talk, I don't think he cared about honing my clinical skills at all. I think his only goal was to make as much money as possible, if I'm honest. And he did not, I don't think he liked being a supervisor. Is that a thread? Do all of the supervisors that I didn't like, did they seem like they didn't like being a supervisor? I'm just reflecting back. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. The supervisors that I personally had really negative experiences with, not only would I say that my felt experience of them was that they didn't like being a supervisor, I'm just like cross-checking. I would say the way I perceived them, so this is all just Marie's little, you know, subjective lens, I felt like they didn't like being therapists. Like, they kind of just like hated this job and they're doing this thing because, I don't know, maybe being a supervisor, maybe they were hoping they'd, I don't know, make more money. Maybe they think it was less awful than seeing therapy clients. Maybe they're on a power trip. I don't know, honestly, why they were supervisors and why they were therapists, if I'm being completely honest. So, yes. That's a little walk down memory lane reflecting on some of my supervision experiences. If you'd love to hear more stories, let me know, but I want to hear your stories. It was interesting to me that the Google search results took me even to the Our Therapist subreddit directly when I did a Google search about bad supervision in therapy. So let's see what people have to say over here. This post is titled, "Can we see some bad supervision stories?" And they say, "Don't be shy. I just need to know that I'm not the only one out there with a complete idiot of a supervisor currently." Oh, it's so sad. "My supervisor recently told us to, quote, make it up when talking about a required piece of documentation that goes in the client's file." And they put one of those facepalm emojis. Ooh, all right. Let's see what some of the most upvoted comments are in response. The top post says, "My old supervisor told me person-centered, quote, wasn't evidence-based, and I couldn't use it at his practice." What? I don't have a response. The next top response says, "Not me, but a classmate during internship shared that 100% of her supervision was done via text. Our internship class was led by the program director, who requested to speak with her privately after class." Oops, yeah. What? Supervision via text. I mean, if you mapped, like, you could use a lot of the same standards for some of the times you can use some of the same standards for supervision as we would use for therapy. Can you imagine if your therapy was exclusively via text? That's not a therapeutic relationship. This doesn't make it. Yeah, I hope that supervisor got busted for it. The next top comment says, "This was in a treatment setting with a client who was cash pay. Supervisor was pushing for the therapist to break confidentiality and tell the parents of an adult client about the client's sex work because, quote, I'm a mother and I would want to know my child was in danger. And, quote, they're paying for the client's treatment." Oh, I just got the chills. Like, this is a supervisor. Like, I already would be upset if this was a therapist, but this is a supervisor pushing their therapist trainee potentially to break confidentiality based on their own, like, countertransference towards their supervisee's client. Like, that's, and that you couldn't even, There's like, it's sometimes I'm so dumbfounded I don't have a response. So sorry if it's just me being like, I can't. That's pretty bad. I'm going to move on to another post in this Our Therapist subreddit that's titled, "Have you ever had a bad supervisor experience?" They say, "I'm currently in practicum and I do not love my supervisor. Her and I just don't mesh well, and I'm cringing at the thought that I'm stuck with her for the next 9 months. Oh no. So instead of wallowing in my situation, I want to hear about your situation. Tell me your crazy stories and how you made it through and what you learned." The top response to this post says, "My first supervisor was amazing, so I was spoiled. My second supervisor was bad. She would scroll on her phone during sessions and had no empathy for clients. Wow. However, I learned to be more assertive and better advocate for clients' needs in a system. I had to go through her for everything and how to work with a therapist that I disagreed with. Then in my last month, when I had built rapport with my supervisor's boss, I said F it and let all my opinions be known." Ooh, I wonder, they're talking about the supervisor was scrolling her phone during sessions, and I wonder if the supervisee, or maybe it was like a group therapy or something like that, where the supervisee could witness how their supervisor behaved with their clients. Um, I'm not sure, but that doesn't sound good. Another response to this post says, "My very first supervisor in practicum was an odd guy whose only advice was to use, quote, the empty chair technique." Oh no. He once jokingly, threatened to kill another practicum student because she called him by his first name and didn't refer to him as doctor. No trash on the empty chair technique, but if that's the only technique you're using, you're not going to get very far. But threatened to kill another practicum student because she called him by his first name and didn't refer to him as doctor. Oh my, just jokingly or not, there's so many things wrong with that. Never. Okay, I could get lost in the Reddit rabbit trail endlessly, but I also wanted to ask some of you all directly who follow some of my stuff if you have any experiences you'd like to share, and some of you submitted some replies. But before we continue this conversation, I'd like to thank Powbox for sponsoring this episode. Based on a poll that I put out last year, only 1/4 of therapists are confident that the email they're using is HIPAA secure. That means that 3 out of 4 therapists listening to this ad right now either aren't using HIPAA secure email or aren't sure if it's HIPAA secure. In 2023, I made the switch to Powbox, and it's been smooth sailing since. Powbox is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into our email, all while using our favorite email provider. It's just running smoothly and quietly in the background, keeping any potential space invaders from interfering with your emails. If you'd like to check out Powbox for yourself, they're offering Private Practice Skills listeners a special discount. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout to get $250 off your first year with Powbox. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring this episode, and now back to more tales of bad supervision. And the question I asked was, what's one memorable supervision story, whether good or bad? Because I didn't want to just say, like, tell me your bad supervision stories. I just wanted to see what came out. I don't think I'm going to be able to read all of them, but here's some of the ones that stand out to me. Someone says, "It just felt like chatting or admin support, not super clinical." Ooh, that feels like it kind of calls back to the research that we read earlier about how having clear goals and structure and agenda is one of the key components, like top 3 components of good supervision. Someone else says, "A supervisor told me that I had to do things that were not in my job description. Had to zip body bags, bring people to the morgue, and pull drawers out, warm people, etc. I was an ER social worker. Trauma up the yin yang from that." Oh my goodness. Wow. Sometimes I'm so dumbfounded, I don't have a response. And I know that that's the whole point of this episode, but I'm just so sorry that happened. Like, you're a social worker in the ER, so you're clearly interacting with high stakes trauma situations. And to be asked, I don't have anything else to say either. The next one's just awful to read. "My supervisor was arrested, so I lost 1,900 hours. Get your hours signed every 3 to 4 months." That's just, the amount that just happened in 2 sentences is so much. first of all, your supervisor was arrested, full stop. I don't know if that was related at all to their, license or unrelated, but that happened. And then I lost 1,900 hours. Like, was that your entire, like, that could be an entire part-time internship, like almost the entire year? Like, is that it? How many? Oh, and you can never get those hours back? And then even their advice is to get your hours signed every 3 to 4 months. And I'm thinking, 3 to 4 months? This may feel dated. I do not know how they do it these days. And I imagine every jurisdiction and license has a different thing, which is hard to keep track of. But back in my day, the California Board of Psychology, who oversees my license, had required that we had to fill out paper logs and have it signed in person by your supervisor. And you would have several weeks on the log, but I think it ran out, like maybe max there was room for 10 weeks. So I remember I would just bring it into supervision and my supervisor would sign it right there in front of me, and then I would just have it. So at max every 2 months. But oh my goodness, are other people seeing 3 to 4 months as the standard of signing things off? This is fascinating to me. That could be its own thing. You lost 1,900 hours because your supervisor was arrested. Like, there's so much to unpack there. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I have to assume that you had to redo 1,900 hours and you couldn't recoup that. That is just awful. That's so bad. The next one says, one of my supervisors was a consultant for Herbalife and tried to sell it to me. And then they put a bunch of exclamation points and question marks. Oh, wow. I'm not going to dig into this. I'm really into like scam stuff because it feels very cult adjacent and I'm really into that stuff. And Herbalife is an MLM. So okay, wow. Like the layers of that, like, okay, also, your supervisor was a consultant for Herbalife. Like, was that their side hustle? I have so many questions, but regardless of like your supervisor's affiliation with an MLM and how confusing that is, it's a free country, they can do that. They certainly should not be selling anything to you ever, ever, ever. That's so inappropriate. Can you imagine? And you're just like a trainee with like no negative income probably, and you're just they're selling you a scammy product. Like it hurts my heart. It hurts my heart. Wow. Another response says, in group supervision, he ignored me while praising the other guy because he reminded him of his son. Come on, guys. Like we can do better. Like this is like bare minimum stuff. Okay. This isn't like advanced supervision skills. This is like basic human skills. Okay. All right. And I put the option if y'all wanted to DM me, if you had more of like a longer story that you could. So let's read some of those. One person says, because my experience was in school counseling, the supervisor at this agency said I needed an internship. So I paid $3,000 at a university to take a class for an internship while the agency paid me $25 an hour as a behavioral assistant. This is despite having a 60-credit master's in school counseling and having already taken and passed the national counselor exam. Years later, when I finally applied for my full licensure, the board told me I never needed any of that. It legit set me back 9 years. Wait, did they actually have to go and redo 9 years worth of stuff? I have so many questions. There is a theme where there's like prejudice in all forms amongst all humans, but this prejudice amongst therapists and supervisors as well, where people like misunderstand other people's credentials, skill sets, trainings, and just make decisions accordingly and judgments. Like, you shouldn't have done a $3,000 internship when you already were like just about licensed. That doesn't make any sense. Of course, I don't know all the details of the situation, but this does not sound right to me. I don't like it. I don't like it. Okay, so in response to my question, what's one memorable supervision story, good or bad? The next person responds, unfortunately, the ones that stand out the most are bad. Driving and going through a drive-through during supervision I paid $115 for. Multiple times this occurred. Talking about her own trauma almost every session. Being 15 plus minutes late and wanting to charge the whole fee. I can go on. Oh, again, this theme of like basic professionalism. Why would you ever be driving through a drive-through during supervision? And not that this should change the quality of the supervision, but this is somebody who's paying for their supervision. And you're going through a drive-through, the other person's talking about their own trauma. I said the other person because I don't even want to call them the supervisor. But okay, the supervisor is talking about their own trauma and being super late, but charging for the whole fee. Like, again, these are like the same basic boundaries we should have as therapists with our clients. We would never take our client. I hope we would never take our client through a drive-through during therapy unless, let's say they have a phobia, a social phobia, and you're working through systematic desensitization and it's on their hierarchy that they're terrified of doing an order at the drive-through, and it is part of your therapeutic treatment to, walk through the steps with your client as you go through the drive-through together. That would be the only scenario where you should be going through a drive-through with your client. And I was going to say the same would be true for supervision, but there would have to be a story like that where it's like clearly for the benefit of the supervisee. Oh, yeah, talking about our own trauma. It's wild to me that this is our reality. Okay, the next person says, my group practicum supervisor was an LMHC, licensed mental health counselor, and I'm an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. He graduated a while ago and would constantly make comments about how I was a marriage therapist versus an individual, implying I wasn't trained well for individual work. Like, that is just so uninformed. At the same time, his knowledge around general therapy practices had not advanced since he graduated. Oh, he was great in his specific niche, but awful in everything else while making passive comments about my abilities. Would sound like, quote, I'm not saying I think this, but some would, ... He also didn't understand the difference between situational DV and characterological DV, which was concerning for couples. I ended up paying for outside supervision from an old college professor, but that wasn't much better, but we did at least conceptualize more similarly. Yeah, I think this is my opinion, but I feel like if you're a supervisor, like, I'm not a supervisor, but I already feel this as just a regular therapist. And also, I put out these episodes, so I want to represent things well. Like, I always feel ultra sensitive, and I don't feel like I have to know every single thing that there is to know, because there's just no way. But, if I were a supervisor and I had somebody that I was going to supervise who had a different background than me, of any nature, but here in this case, a different licensure, then I would want to make sure, at least at that point, that I educated myself. Like this person saying, their supervisor's an LMHC. So, I'm saying like, okay, I'm an LMHC and this supervisee is an LMFT. Like, can we chit chat about what is different between those two different kind of training contexts? Maybe I might ask some of my other therapist friends who are LMFTs. I might check in consult group. I might, wouldn't you educate yourself even if you're not yet informed? Or at a bare minimum, just acknowledge to your supervisee, like, wow, I'm a little bit out of my element. So can you help me understand a little bit better what it entails to have an LMFT and be very sensitive to the places that you're uninformed about. Okay, and this will be the last of the not so great memories from supervision that somebody sent me. They say, I was sharing with my supervisor some of my concerns about new policies being brought into the service, and she shared them with our team lead without my consent, who came down on me like a ton of bricks. You should respect your supervisee with the same respect that you offer to your clients. And to have your supervisee tell you something in supervision and then like not just tell anyone, but like the team lead. So this is like part of your employment. It sounds like uh s- sometimes I get so upset that my sentence is gone out of my head because I'm just like, this should never happen. That should not have happened. If somebody was really concerned about something, then like if your supervisee tells you something that's genuinely concerning that might impact their employment, then you should have a conversation with your supervisee. And if you're needing to tell other people about whatever happened, that should be something your supervisee knows about first. I think about the same context where we would, when we would break confidentiality with our therapy clients, ideally, when we can, we let our clients know, hey, this is one of those scenarios that I'm mandated to report. And before you've ever made that report, you loop them in when possible. And so it doesn't sound like this was one of those scenarios, but like I would treat the supervision context with the same like sacred value of confidentiality to say like, this is not mine to share. And there's some exceptions to that, but then my supervisee should be the one who knows about that first. So I wonder what motivates, like, how do people get to be a supervisor when they're not good at it? When they're not only not good at being a supervisor, but like the boundary crossings, the violations are essential skills of all therapists, not just like a special skill that you develop as a supervisor. So that's like alarming to me. Like people who haven't mastered or, upheld basic therapeutic skills and boundaries are now supervising the next generation of therapists. And a lot of times the therapist trainees have a better understanding just by even, innate common sense or their initial training that they've had, that whatever their supervisor is not correct. What an awful sinking feeling. To leave us on a good note, one person did send me a positive supervision story, so let's do that one as our last one. My first male supervisor was at a military base. He was the chief of behavioral health and I believe a captain. He was a tall, big man and fairly intimidating, honestly. He was often straight-faced and his style wasn't something I was used to. But, all caps, but, he was the first supervisor to alert me that I would say, I don't know, when asked a question, and then I'd answer the question with a right or acceptable answer. He was the first person that saw how I downplayed myself and how I used language to do it. He wasn't mean in pointing it out. He did it very kindly and told me to stop. He'd raise an eyebrow every time I did that. He really taught me how to speak more professionally and how not to undercut myself. I appreciated it, and it has served me very well. I love that. That was sort of like a don't judge a book by its cover kind of moment. And also the idea of like being a great therapist and a great supervisor doesn't always mean that you have to have like kind of one type of packaging for like how you present of being like, I'm thinking of this like kind of stereotype that I might exude myself as well of like being very nurturing and motherly and expressive emotionally. And it sounds like this supervisor was maybe a bit more matter of fact, but also caring and safe for this person to get the corrective feedback in a way that was super helpful. Well, I'm realizing I had planned that I would talk about all of these things, but I didn't have like a cute little takeaway at the end. I think probably the reason why I wanted to talk about this most is just to shed light and validate, like if you are in an awful supervision experience, or maybe even just like a mediocre, like not great one, for you to feel validated. Because I think for me, when I had some of those awful supervisors earlier on, it's like part of me definitely knew that whatever they were doing was not right. And I wasn't okay. I knew I wasn't okay with it. But also there was always that part of me that was like, oh, well, Marie, like, what do you know? Like you're young and you're early in your career and like maybe this is just like normalized and acceptable. And I would kind of downplay the part of me that was going like, ooh, I don't like this. This doesn't seem right. Is this right? Like I'm hoping that people listening, if you're going through that, that you can listen to the part of yourself that has concerns or feels uncomfortable or whatever it might be. And I hope you feel empowered too to advocate for yourself. This is something I did want to say of like advocating for yourself when you have a bad supervision experience is so challenging because you really need your hours. So I remember feeling this way, and I've heard others express this. Like, if you complain or give feedback to your supervisor, what if they don't sign off on your hours? What if they don't give you as many clients if they're in charge of your schedule? Like, they have so much power over your future, or even if it's not them, like, I don't know, you complain to your governing board about some unethical practices your supervisor is doing. Is that board going to then say like, oh, well, we can't count your hours because like, I don't know, your supervisor was taking you through a drive-through instead of doing supervision, so we can't count those hours? Like, no, like that's a huge risk. So I can imagine a lot of people just being like, listen, just give me my hours and get me out of here. I'm not going to mess with this because I just need my hours and I need to get out. Because again, we are so underpaid during those trainee years and we're trying to get through it. We're trying to get through it, make it to the other side. So I think that was also something I wanted to talk about of like, it's really difficult to give feedback, but hopefully if we can shed light on it more often, there can be more avenues to change the outcomes. I will say though, bad supervision is something I think about a lot. I don't know what to do about it, but as I often say on this channel, I can shed light on it and talk about it. So I hope you found this helpful or validating, or, just like look out for your friends too. Like if you work in a setting where there's practicum students, supervisees or whatever, like just know that like some supervisors are just not great. I think we can say that pretty definitively that like a lot of supervisors are not great, like really not great. And if it just so happens that like somebody listening is a supervisor that might be doing some of the offenses that I alluded might be subpar, then there's an invitation. Like maybe it's a good time for you to do some consultation, some supervision, and invite some of that safe corrective feedback. I think that would be awesome. Let's do that. Well, thank you to all of you who responded to my poll, sent in your stories. I always appreciate when you participate. It's really helpful. And I hope it was helpful to all of you to hear from each other and just to kind of like look under the hood a little bit of like what's going on with supervision in our field and why isn't it better? Let's do better. And if you have a positive supervision experience, feel free to share it in the comments below if you want to, so we can kind of, exemplify what good supervision looks like. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.